There we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of the Red, White, and You Show with yours truly, the military medium. Folks, I have with me a very special co-host, Sean Wyman is with me. Sean, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, Dean. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I love the Tory behind you, the Iron Rakkasan Tory. And if that wasn't enough for everybody saying, what the hell is that thing? So back in the day, if you caught Sean and I, the episode that Sean was on, we were talking about our days back in Fort Campbell, excuse me, and where our next guest was actually our battalion commander first time. Yeah. So we're really excited to have him on here today. Excuse me 1 minute while I'm okay. So they're wanting to delay till 12:20, Sean.
Okay.
Is that going to work with your schedule?
Of course. Man, I saved a lot of space for today,
okay.
man. Just
blocked
in case.
off the day. Okay.
Yeah, man.
Great. So perfect. But I think what we'll do is we'll keep on recording a little bit here in the beginning.
Let's do it.
But interesting, back in the days of then Lieutenant Colonel Petraeus, that was the days of Sergeant Major Purdy, wasn't it, Sean?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
What a crazy shit back then.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, crazy man. And I was just reflecting today, Sean. I was thinking back to those days, and I'm like, God, it's hard to believe that it's close to 30 years ago.
Yeah,
pretty close.
Yeah.
So depending on when you were in, but
yeah, I came in 92, and I went to Fort Campbell right at the beginning of 93. Yeah, man.
Yeah. So, and that was the same for me. I think I got to, I left in 92. So, and I know.
I think I went to Campbell. Like I went through basic, got done with basic, got Christmas off, and then I had to be at Campbell like January 3rd or something.
That's crazy.
And I was literally there like right there at the beginning of 93. Yeah, that's cool.
One of the things that I just remember, I was thinking of the caliber of training, and then I was kind of extrapolating that forward, right? So I was like, all the years that I put in after, and I was like, I don't think I've done some pretty strenuous training myself, but I don't remember any training that was as realistic as we did in that battalion at Fort Campbell.
Yeah.
With Command Sergeant Major Purdy, Lieutenant Colonel Petraeus, and all the other commanders and first sergeants, I don't remember. I can't remember another duty station that was as realistic. And I was thinking about that, when you become a leader, right, you have to do all these risk assessments for ranges and all this. And I'm thinking, holy cow, they took some risks. But the level of training that we received, I mean, I felt and I don't know about you, and I know every company was a bit different, but the confidence level, I would dare to say second to none.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Where, you have, I think everybody was walking around with the, cojones the size of brass ball bearings, right? And I think there was an aspect to that.
They made us believe that we were invincible. And when you had a leader like Petraeus and you had a leader like Purdy that were out in the field with you, and they didn't have to go out. You know that as well as I do, man. Right. They could have gone out and just shown up and, hey, what you guys doing? Great to see you. And off they go back home. Man, those guys were out there with us in the training, man. There were days where Purdy was shooting next to me. I remember, in training and looking next to me, and I'm a private, and I've got a command sergeant major next to me firing a weapon. I mean, Yeah, and it was
on a
nothing from the
live fire
Petraeus
range.
either. Yeah,
Yeah.
Petraeus would be out in the live firing ranges all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that was one of the things that motivated me. Like, you were in the suck, so to speak, of it was cold, it was wet, everybody was miserable. And here, everybody from, battalion commander on down was in the field, standing there in the rain, in the mud.
Yep.
And you were talking about Command Sergeant Major Purdy. Both those guys would be in the prone or right over top you, or, hey, you got some ammo.
Yeah, I know.
Purdy was famous for that. But in the, it was just kind of like that right there beside you. And I think for me personally, that was a motivator, because it was like, here you're feeling sorry for yourself, and all of a sudden here you got a command sergeant major, or you got the battalion commander right there, the same. And it's like, well, I don't got nothing to complain about. Everybody else, everybody's in the same boat, literally. And I think that was great. But I was thinking the caliber of training and just some of the events, like what we think, and we're going to talk today too with General Petraeus, but talking about, the trench, range, and anybody that's, remembers that facility. And I don't even know, it just how we used to lay waste to that thing.
I know.
And, the incidents with, when, when he was actually shot,
Yes.
At that range. So it's, and I'm just okay. All right. Just reading this. I just gotta just responding back to him here.
Cool.
All right. All right. Let me go do this real quick. Let's see if it'll let me. Okay, there we go. And 12:32. There we go. All right, and then we'll go like that, and back to, good Lord, I'm having a, all right. Sean, what's your email again?
It's info at goingbeyondthecall.com.
Got it. I'm going to send you a new link for the 12:30 interview.
Okay.
I just sent it to him as well. So perfect. There we go.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited though. Getting back to the interview, I'm really excited. But it's interesting as we sit here on Thanksgiving week, just reflecting back on some of the things that we're thankful for. And, just like the leaders that kind of helped shape us,
Yeah.
not only in our military careers, but kind of in our lives. So here we were, snot-nosed kids at the time. It's hard to think back that far, right?
I know, right?
And yeah, it's crazy, crazy. And if we were to go back, I know it'd all be changed. I know that whole area where the battalion was, I think that's all gone now, from what I understand. And
I haven't been there in forever, man.
yeah, and air assault schools move physically, location. It's not right across the street anymore from where it used to be, and it's
Wow.
actually down where, if you remember that obstacle course that was back in the woods,
Yeah.
down in that LZ or HLZ area,
Mhm.
it was back in there somewhere. So
Oh, wow.
they were talking about moving the whole school back, and I can't even remember. It's like a mile down the road or half mile or whatever it
Mm.
is. So crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And, and I think that summarizes it pretty well, talking about change. It's like, never, it's something that you can't get away from. And, it's just something that, that you just got to be flexible with, I think. Right. So,
Right.
and, here you continued on a law or a life of law enforcement and doing that, and then also the public speaking aspect
Hmm.
and helping veterans. And how is that going, by the way? How's everything going with?
It's been good, man. I've had some classes. We got some classes on board, and we had some great success with those. That's been with
Nice.
law enforcement and corrections too, man. We're starting to get in the corrections door. I'm still looking for my foot in the door with military though, man. And that's one
Okay.
of the reasons why I'm really excited to connect with Petraeus, because I'd love to. I want to show him what I'm doing and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and see if he has some ideas or some thoughts on
Yeah.
ways
For
to get
sure.
that implement. Not on your show. I don't want to do it on your show, but I want to connect with him
Right.
off air, obviously. But
Yeah.
I've been wanting to connect with him for a long time, man. Really, more than anything, just to tell him thank you,
Mm.
because he believed in me. He saw something in me that I didn't even know was in myself. And he
Right.
did it very spontaneously. The way that moment
Hmm.
happened, we're on a run and he's running with me and he knew me, like he knew my name. He was like, and I don't even know if he'll remember me now. I'll be interested to see. But he's running and he goes, "Hey, weren't you just in pre-ranger?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, "Well, when are you going to ranger school?" And I'm like, "I don't think they're going to let me go because I'm a private first class and this and that." And he's like, "Well, I'll tell you what." And then we had that competition, man. We had the rope competition, and I beat him up the rope. Whether he let me or not, I don't know. I'll set my
Right.
ego aside for that one, right? Because either way, I
Yeah.
mean, I got there, man. And within a few months, I had a date to go to Ranger School, and my Sergeant Major Purdy about had a meltdown. I mean, he was like livid. He's like, "I don't know how you did it, but you better." I'm just telling you, man, because privates back then were considered not mentally ready for something like
Right.
that because
Right.
of the mental state that you had to be in to. And honestly, I don't know if I was mentally ready until Purdy prepared me mentally by saying, "You only come back one or two ways. You come back dead, or you come back with a tab." And I genuinely believe that in my heart, when I instilled that in my heart the moment he told me that, and never let that go, no matter how bad the suck got in Ranger
Right.
School. I held on to that for even in my near death experience in Ranger School. I'm not dead. I got to get back out there, and that's my mindset. As crazy as that is, was I'm not dead. I got to get back out there. I got to finish. I got to finish. I'm not dead. He told me I either was dead or I came back with a tab. I'm coming home with a tab, and I did, man. I came home with a tab, and by the time I got back, I think Petraeus was either out the door or almost out the door at that point, and off to do his next thing. And Purdy left, shortly after that.
Right.
So
Right.
those are two men of great character that really, and I know Purdy doesn't know that. I know he never saw that, but I'm sure, you think about how many men did they inspire or show, you know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
never knew. They had no idea how many people they actually,
Right.
have, just a minor interaction and how that inspired.
Right.
I mean, look how many people I've been able to impact from that moment,
Right. Right.
So it's
I think
incredible.
that's I think that's important, very important, or something very important to focus on is we have no idea in our everyday interactions. So,
None.
obviously we're talking about Petraeus and we're talking about Purdy but, they had no idea, you know, it's this, here's another young troop, right?
Hmm.
And it's just daily business. And, but in the interaction that you have every day, whatever you do, you might be inspiring the next superstar, the next person that is going to affect hundreds, maybe thousands, perhaps even millions of lives.
Yeah.
And by giving them whatever it is, maybe it's just an ear, holding space to listen to them. Maybe it's, helping
Hmm.
them attain that next, goal, whatever that is.
Hmm.
I think is something important to focus on is, what you do today impacts other people tomorrow and in
Absolutely.
ways that we can't see. And
Absolutely.
I think that's, and they had a way, I feel they had a way of doing that for a lot of people within the battalion
Hmm.
of, because it was a no bullshit, like, you got to prove your worth. It was difficult. It
Yeah.
was it was
Yeah.
hard. But um if you earn the right to be within the Iron Rakkasans, I tell you what, it was almost like I felt like having like the golden ticket, right?
Hmm.
Went from almost in the beginning of I don't know if I want to be here to I wouldn't want to be anyplace else
Yeah.
once you found your place
Hmm.
amongst the rest of them, right?
Hmm.
It was certainly a different time and a different
It was.
but yeah, certainly, wearing that Tory, if you will, as a badge of honor, so to speak.
Hmm.
And yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
certainly interesting times, and we look forward to bringing him on here in a little bit, here in about an hour and 30 minutes. But I know that he was detained with some meetings that went a bit longer than when he anticipated. So
Right.
we'll play it by ear, and of course we'll edit this to
Sure.
make it all good.
Sure. Sure.
But I'm excited to have you on, Sean. I'm excited to have you as a co-host.
I'm honored, man. Extremely honored.
As soon as I saw, as soon as I reached out and he was very quick to respond, I got to throw that out right away. Very
Yeah.
personal, just like he is, and saying I would love to. However, it might take some time.
Yeah.
I'm kind of. He said there's a lot of other people in front of you, and I said absolutely. I'm patient, and sure enough, true to his word, and as soon as I got locked in, that's why I was like, "Hey, man, you want to be co-host?" Like, uh,
You
certainly need
did, man.
to
You
get
got me.
in
And
here.
at first I was just like, are you kidding me? Are you serious? I would do that. Absolutely, man. Because
That's
I've been trying to figure out how to connect with him. And I've
right.
heard, and it's funny because his name pops up a lot on social media.
It does.
Hey,
He's
I'm
still.
interviewing Petraeus. Hey, I'm interviewing Petraeus.
It
And
does.
so to actually get the opportunity to speak with him and to again just tell him thank you for the opportunity that he gave me. He believed in me when most didn't, and
Right.
that meant a lot. And I've never taken that for granted.
Right. Right. Well, and I think it's interesting too, is I know that, like you said, he does a lot of podcasts, a lot of radio shows, whatever. Whether it was his time with as a director of CIA or,
Yeah.
commanding some coalition
Yeah.
team, in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever he was. But I just think about again going back to the other soldiers and other folks that he inspired.
Yeah.
and it's trying to make a difference in the world. And
Yeah.
so that's the cool piece. So that's why I'm excited to share this episode with others, to really kind of show maybe a side that people typically don't see. More of a, how do I want to say, not a humanity piece, because he's, obviously when you get to that level, it's almost like a political kind of a figure, public
This ought to be,
figure.
yeah, this ought to
Yeah,
be a really relaxed, fun interview for him to kind of him to get to reminisce and go
right,
back to that place and go, man, I remember those runs. Man, I remember those mornings. I remember
right,
that time, when things weren't so complicated and you weren't, you didn't have all these pressures on you. And, he was just a young commander then, man, just working his way up the ranks,
right.
and
Yeah,
that's where he learned and got all of his, all the experience and everything. And, we were
yeah.
part of that. That's really cool.
Well, and it's just like you and I, that was just a part, that was a blip in time
Mhm.
in our military careers, and we both went on to do bigger and better things, all of us.
Yeah.
And of course, for you know, uh, Petraeus, then he, obviously became a general officer, and then one thing led to another, and next thing
Yeah.
you know, he's working for President Obama, and
Yeah.
as director of CIA, and he
Yeah.
retired, and
Yeah.
blah blah blah, so um life is kind of funny how it leads to, one doorway opens to another, and
Hmm.
just kind of a blip in time, but those moments can make a huge impact. So I think it's interesting, but I'm really excited, man. I really am. Um and we got some fun questions. We're going to talk about that time that he was shot,
Yes.
and talking about that. And then, because I always remember doing the see, I wasn't there when that happened.
I wasn't either.
That was in 91. And but it was always talked about, kind of like a, not a urban legend, because everybody knew it factually happened, but it was always talked about. And it was like, all right. And I remember ever since then, it was almost like the finger, the 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 trigger finger discipline was immensely, practiced, like almost to the point, like, I'm gonna break your damn finger. They weren't saying that, but the junior leaders were very fanatical about, and rightly
Sure.
so. But
Yeah.
and we're gonna get into that, but that's actually how it happened. The soldier wasn't practicing um uh, trigger finger awareness and discipline. We're going to talk about Sergeant Major Purdy a little bit.
Hmm.
And then, of course, his thoughts, navigating the challenges about veteran, suicide and homelessness, and
Yeah.
all that. And then, a bunch of other stuff. I know really we're still, the closure of Afghanistan really hasn't been, it was just this year. And, where he served in Afghanistan from July 2010 to July 2011.
Hmm.
And, asking him about the sustains and improves in there, what his thoughts on that aspect. And then, some of the stuff about greatest threat, what he foresees. And then, talking about some other stuff, but kind of what's next for him, what he's working on, all that. Um, and but I think the biggest thing is kind of talking about um, you know, kind of I don't want to say just shooting the ship, but in a sense,
Yeah.
just kind of keeping it loose and fun, and just connecting with him. So I think would be a
Definitely.
good time. So for sure. So
Definitely.
all right. And corner. we have retired General David Petraeus with us. And spoiler alert, way back in the day, when it was Lieutenant Colonel Petraeus, he was our battalion commander. And we thought, it'd be something really extra special to reach out to him and do a nice little chat with him and see what he's up to. So, sir, welcome to the Red White News Show.
Rakkasan, Air Assault. Good to see you guys.
It's great to see you as well. I know it was interesting when Sean and I did an interview on the work that he's doing, battling suicide and everything else. We started talking about our time at Fort Campbell and the Rakkasans and reminiscing. And we were just talking about you and Sergeant Major Purdy and just what we learned as individuals and kind of what you all instilled in us, even being at the battalion level, but really the op tempo and the environment that we lived in within that battalion. What did you take away from that command? Because I know that you went on to serve in so many other capacities, but what did you take away from that command, sir?
Well, I think there were a number of, it was an extraordinary experience for me. If you think about it, battalion command is the first level at which you're still very much at that level where every soldier is a name and a face, for the most part, not just a number as it becomes at higher levels. But you are a little bit removed, and you have fairly mature individuals underneath you as the company commanders and first sergeants, with, again, 2 majors as your executive officer and operations officer, and a usually great command sergeant major, and a bunch of other staffs and so forth. And it's the first place where you have a degree of autonomy that you just don't find quite at the company command level. And you have a scope for initiative, and we were allowed to exercise a lot of initiative by 2 great brigade commanders, Colonel Clark and Colonel Dees, and we did. And what we set about doing was building a culture of toughness, of physical and mental toughness, built around very high standards of discipline. As you recall, we were arguably even anal about some of this stuff, more than a bit. The crazy haircuts and the top button and all of the standards for rigging your gear. And it wasn't just on paper. We enforced it. We inspected for it. We insisted upon it. And then, of course, the physical fitness component that was almost off the charts. I think about it now. Remember, we had an hour and a half of PT every morning, and we locked the barracks during that time. We did not allow people to go to gymnasiums or fitness centers because it ended up doing weight watching, not weight lifting. Very few people knew their way around it. And then on the days where you'd really like to go, when it's cold or wet, if they're thronged with weak units and so forth. And so we just put them off limits. And then we had this great focus on these other areas, small unit live fires that were very aggressive, drills, huge emphasis on drills and real expertise in the technical components of being a light infantryman. And then, of course, air assault tactics and techniques. And then the emphasis on getting our enlisted and non-commissioned officers in particular to Ranger School, based on the thesis that if you had 20 or more enlisted or non-commissioned officer Rangers in an infantry company, it just transforms the unit. And we proved that with a couple of the companies that did indeed achieve that. And what I've just laid out are the 5 areas of enormous emphasis. And so, what did I take from it? That you really have to settle on these 5 areas. It can be 4, it could be 6, I guess. But that's what you need to do, particularly, again, as a battalion commander. You have a certain degree of latitude from in the space that's created by the division, in our case, the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault, the brigade, again, the 3rd Brigade, the Rakkasan Brigade at that time, in fact. But within that, you have real scope for initiative. And we settled on these 5. I did, really. I had time. I was working I was the aide to the Chief of Staff of the Army, And when I wasn't recruiting officers or non-commissioned officers for the great battalion that I was going to be privileged to take command of in the summer of 1991, I was sketching out, okay, and you just keep building out, because it's not enough to just say that our priorities are the following 5 areas. You have to then operationalize them. You have to have real standards. You have to have metrics. You have to understand what is success. What does it look like? And all the rest of this. And then how do you build this into your training schedule? How do you adjust? Remember, we actually changed the hours for breakfast to later because we wanted to have that whole hour and a half for physical training in the morning. So we couldn't start any earlier than anybody else. That was a post edict, but we could go longer, and we did. And when you think about the emphasis in these different areas, it really made this a very different battalion. It was one that really did stand out, and it stood out in other ways as well, because again, in these areas that you could say, you know, who was best at this or that or whatever, again, there were metrics, there were accomplishments. You know, we won the football championship 2 years in a row, the cross country championship. That wasn't a question, of course, given all of our fleet runners. And I was like, I believe I was one of those. And these other areas, again, it didn't matter what it was. And certainly Rangers, we had 3 times as many enlisted and non-commissioned officer Ranger graduates as any other battalion in, I think, actually in the Army outside of the Ranger Regiment itself, certainly outside those at Fort Campbell. And so this transformed that unit, and it built a culture, again, to come back to that, of real pride in physical and mental toughness. You know, bring it on. We're the Iron Rakkasans. We can do this. You challenge us, you're challenging. I mean, I remember General Keane, Brigadier General Keane at that time, he was the Assistant Division Commander for Operations. He had our number, and he loved that battalion as well. He was out there with us all the time. But he loved to challenge me, which then challenged the battalion. I remember one time it was for the Association of U.S. Army Membership. And this is something that most battalions, you know, they hate to do it, and they just don't. And I think the Sergeant Major gathered everybody together and said, okay, look, we've been challenged. Let's just get together. Let's just do this thing, and let's show them that we're number one in this area as well. And I think we ended up with more AUSA members than we had members in the battalion or something. This is like the, you know, voting in Chicago back in the day. But again, and so there was no question, you know, that, yeah, that's another trophy we're going to put in because again, there was this commitment, this embrace of the reality that life is a competitive endeavor, and then as the great Fred Johnson, this incredibly inspirational Battle Hard company commander used to say, you know, winners win stuff, sir. I mean, how profound. Well, they do. Again, you don't get a trophy in the real world just for showing up or a t-shirt. This is not little kids soccer. This is, you know, something that is intensely competitive, but you compete to be the best team players as well. And at various times we took some for the team. We opened our pre-ranger course to the entire brigade because no one else had one at that time. Ultimately became the model for the division when I was made the division plans, operations, and training officer. So again, I think it's about building a culture, recruiting the leaders who will embrace that culture, and then frankly, in a way, encouraging others to self-select out. You know, if you don't want to embrace that culture, then that's okay. But, you know, you might want to do that somewhere else. And all of that resulted in what was established as a really hard, tough, competent, more than quietly confident. Occasionally there was a little bit of cockiness in it, but which is not to be discouraged, but it has to be controlled.
Right.
Because again, you're part of a team and a team of teams and all the rest. But that's, you know, what did you take from it? The importance of building a unit around certain priorities that results in achieving the culture that you think is appropriate for that unit. But again, this, you know, I might have settled on these 5 priorities, but it was the entire team then that sort of helped me refine them, helped me operationalize them, helped me build on them, and embrace them. And the whole team got in it together.
Very, and I was going to say, in all the years after Fort Campbell that I went on to serve, I don't know about Sean, but I know that I never saw any or experienced any training that was as hard or as realistic as what I experienced with my time with the Rakkasans. And, it was interesting because I'd always think back to, I was like, geez, back, how did they do it? And I was like, well, it was something bigger, but I was like, as a, I think at the time I was the E4. And so you're only seeing a small piece of the pie, but I was like, there's a lot of people involved, but I was like, whatever that was, it was certainly I know it made a profound impact, positive impact on my life, and really helped me, carry values and everything well beyond the military. And it was a very key integral piece as becoming a enlisted leader going through the years. Mm-hmm. And kind of thinking back to, you talked about those, the top button and talking about.
I mean, there's no real logic to that. It was just to make us different. Actually,
right.
The logic was that theoretically, you never camouflage your neck all that well. Right. So to fix that, we'll just button the top button. The truth was the battle button, as it became called, or a variety of other pejorative titles, it was really to make us different. And then we'd get sort of chided about it and everything else. And then people pulled together. I saw this, yeah, for example, in the early days of the Ranger units where, they had that same, in fact, the haircut that we had, it was almost like a Bert and Ernie haircut. I mean, it's very unattractive on a head shape like mine. You're okay if you had the all noggin club, Sean's hair, his look good regardless. Right. But if you don't have that nice sort of solid square head and so forth, it's not particularly attractive or appealing or what have you. But we did it again just because then people would screw with us. And then when they screwed with us and criticized or chided us or made fun of it, you pulled together, and it was all about that. And so we had plenty of, again, various tactics, techniques, and procedures to get that kind of cohesion around these, what were sometimes almost nonsensical ideas, except that they worked.
Well, and a lot of it. Oh, go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
I was just going to jump in real quick. I was going to say, I definitely can second what you said about the toughness of the training that we went through. And, I remember the day that you came and you were running beside me. I'd finished pre-Ranger. I can also validate that pre-Ranger was still to this day. I think pre-Ranger was harder for me than Ranger school was. It legitimately.
It was designed that way. I've never done PT as hard as that. To do 187, so not 101 for the division, but 187 4-count leg spreaders on gravel. Because remember, we took over the former prison, the stockade.
Yes,
was our barracks for this thing. I mean, to add to the the setting and so forth, to get this just right, so you sleep in former prison cells.
Yes, sir.
We didn't lock him in, but again, and then there was pea gravel in the parking lot out there. That's where we did PT. Yeah. We also we didn't just have one FLA frontline ambulance following our formation. No. We had two, sometimes more, because there were, and to be candid, we did some dumb things too. We didn't really understand really how significant not heat stroke, but heat exhaustion can be. And we almost prided ourselves at running 5 miles at a really tough pace, even though the wet bulb was whatever it was, so you're talking 90 degrees and 90 degrees humidity or something. And some of that it took me a while longer in my career to realize that that's probably not the brightest of approaches, because you really are tempting fate.
Yes, sir.
Happily, we never had anybody who was seriously injured, but we took a lot of guys to the hospital with various forms of heat injuries at certain times. And again, over time we learned, but that was just how tough it was. And again, our view was, we want to make this so tough that if people make it through our pre-Ranger course, unless they get injured somehow, unless there's some kind of freak accident, they're going to sail through Ranger School. And that actually was the case. I mean, we had way over a 90% graduation rate.
Yeah.
For enlisted and non-commissioned. And keep in mind, by the way, occasionally I sent 2 PV2s, not just, Spec 4s or PFCs. And I would call the Ranger Training Brigade. And I said, when I went through the pre-command course, you said, if we ever need an exception to a policy to call personally, I'm calling personally. We have a PV2 RTO, my RTO, a guy who is impervious to cold. I've never seen anybody quite like him. And he sailed through the course. And then we had a PV2 medic who was similarly incredible, and sent him through the course. We said plenty of PFCs and Spec 4s. And again, this is not the normal process in those days. We would go and get all the Ranger slots in the division on the day that
I remember Purdy. I remember Purdy chewing me out because you got me a slot. And he goes, I don't know how you did it. I don't know what happened, but I know one thing, you better come. There's only 2 ways you come back. You come back with a tab or you come back dead. That's it. And I almost died.
And this is, Purdy added to this an additional element to this.
Yeah.
That was it was on the edge very much. I mean, a lot of stuff what we did was on the edge. The truth is we could not do that, I don't think, today in certain respects. There's certain things that you just, because again, we had standards that were higher than the Army or division or brigade standards,
right,
in areas in which you were not allowed to have higher standards. And yet we did, and it was sort of applauded, actually. In fact,
yes,
an interesting comment is that in the summer between my first and second year of command, that late spring, I got a call from the commanding general of the division, Major General Miller, on the hotline, which I seldom got. And so I picked it up, said, yes, sir. He said, hey, look, my son is an ROTC cadet. He's coming home for the summer. I'd like him to be in one of the great units of our U.S. Army. I said, oh, yes, sir. And what would that be? And he said, 3rd of the 187. And I said, bring him on. But I said, before he comes down, before he reports, make sure he has a high and tight haircut. Make sure he is an AUSA member. And because I said, because the CG of the division is pretty hot on this stuff. We're trying to protect our reputation here, and make sure that he has memorized the drills in Field Manual 7-8 Rifle Squad and Platoon. And he said, we'll go. And he came down and had a tremendous summer with us. But what Purdy brought was he took it even a little bit further than I was willing to push it. And the truth is that Tory behind you, Sean,
yes, sir,
back in the day, the 3rd of the 187 Tory actually had on it. I'd come in every morning, there'd be something new. I would sort of come in like this and sort of, what is it today? And it would be, not for the weak or faint-hearted would be added. Every single day there was some new element that Purdy added to this mix. And people, again, just became fiercely proud of being part of this unit that was willing to have higher standards, at least in its own mind, to be tougher and more physically fit, and frankly, more, in some ways, more technically competent as well. I mean, we had more air assault operations, training operations, for example, I think, than any other brigade, not any other battalion. In part, we were playing on the priority that was given to us because we were going to go to the National Training Center. But in part, it was also just being aggressive. And then they shut us off from air assets. So I went to my buddy, the General Support Battalion commander in the division, who never got to do anything because his units, all his helicopters were flying the CG and the ADCO and all these division assets around. I said, how would you like to be an air mission commander for a training operation with the great 3rd of the 187? And so we cobbled it together and got some here and got some there, got some buddies over here in the Chinook outfit. And the next thing you know, we have a credible air assault training operation again. But it was a very, very aggressive unit that was part of the culture, the spirit of the unit. I mean, it was the kind of place that it was one of those where you encourage the kind of initiative that is guided by the maxim, in the absence of orders, figure out what they should have been and execute aggressively. And that's the kind of organization it was. And by the way, that culture really stayed very, very true, certainly all the way through the war years in Iraq, because I would go see that organization. When I was the division commander, so this is before the invasion of Iraq, and I'm talking all the way through the surge in Iraq, my 4-star, 3 and 4-star tours. But when I was the division commander before we deployed, I remember one morning, it was just, it's late fall. It's raining, really just pouring down the way it could there at Fort Campbell. It's very cold. And I said, okay, guys, we're going down to my old battalion. And I guarantee you, they're going to be out there because that culture is still strong, I'm sure. And we go down and we see all the other units, they're canceling PT or they're sniveling into the gym or, something like that. And we come around the corner and gee, we don't see anybody. I said, no, I'll bet they're around back. And we go back there and there's the battalion. And we ran with that battalion that morning. It was just, again, absolutely pouring, called cadence. Everybody's into it, running around the formation. And again, that's the kind of unit that was built, again, really my predecessor as well, but certainly we amped that up big time during the time I was privileged to be the commander. And it stayed that way. And I would wager it probably still is. In fact, actually, I've stayed in touch with commanders subsequently, and they all put their own brand on it, their own marker, what have you. But that, for example, our Iron Rakkasan competition is still alive and well, or at least it was under the last commander. And again, these traditions are continued, and they are, again, that culture has been preserved, again, with slight modifications here and there ever since.
Absolutely. One of the last things I'll share on that is I remember, I believe it was our S6 or the Commo folks in the battalion area putting up PA systems, climbing telephone poles, putting up PA systems. And then the staff duty every morning would have to play, I believe there was a couple tapes. One was Patton, and then, the great speech during PT. So you're doing PT to this. The other was, I believe, Native American war chants. And
this might have come after my time, but not after Purdy's time.
This is all Sergeant Major Purdy. And the other thing, obviously, he had a microphone, and sometimes he would get on there and it was almost, I was like, boy, that almost sounds like the Patton speech. And it was kind of inspiring as far as
well, and again, he would come in the morning. He would do stuff that I'd never dared to do. I felt like I would have been laughed at, but he'd come in the morning and morning killers, that kind of thing. And again, he had that little special element to him that was a very useful component in the mix and complemented what I was trying to do very, very much. I've often talked about the job of a command sergeant major or even a first sergeant, that, what you want to be is one who you don't want to be a backseat of the commander kind of sergeant major. You want to get out independently. You want to expand the impact of the commander and the commanders. And again, that's what he was very much. And by the way, for what it's worth, that's what Command Sergeant Major Marvin Hill was, just incredibly in the we had 4 combat tours together: 101st Airborne Division, Surge in Iraq, Central Command, and Command in Afghanistan. And several of those are very short notice. And he came, every time he'd give up whatever he was doing and ruck up and join me in these things. And again, Marvin Hill he'd go out on his own. His convoy alone got hit. I forget how many, it was between 5 and 10 times during the surge in Iraq.
Wow.
They got ambushed and everything. They still kept going out. So really that's the kind of senior non-commissioned officer you want, not the guy who's just sort of hanging around, riding around in your helicopter, Humvee and that kind of stuff, because it's easy.
I was going to say, man, that is the one thing that you both instilled in the future leaders, not just there, but all over, was the fact that you lead by example. It's not enough to
Oh,
just
very much
talk the
so.
talk. You have to walk the
Oh, yeah.
walk. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
when you would run with
Yeah.
us, when
Yep.
Purdy, who is like 75% burned from all the stuff that he
Oh,
had
yeah.
gone through, and
Yep.
when you see a
Yep.
man like that running
Yep.
and screaming and
Yeah.
motivating his troops, you can't help but not want to be a part of that culture. And like, you know,
Yeah. No,
I still reflect back and
it's
go,
very,
I would have gone to hell and back with him. I would
no,
have, man. I
he was
mean, no questions
extraordinary.
asked.
Yep. I remember he had been shot in Vietnam, I think through the fleshy part of his calf or something,
Yeah.
working with a ranger unit or some kind of special ops unit. And he literally had to walk 17 miles until they could get to an aid station. He felt that everybody in the
He
army
wanted to do that at
should
Ranger
be shot.
Battalion.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yes.
he wanted to.
Yes.
Yeah, no, again, this is just, you know,
Right.
there were occasionally times, though, I remember there was one time where we both did end up at the same range, just coincidentally, a live fire exercise. And so we're going behind the troops and, you know, getting down and getting up and all this stuff and all the rest of that. And Purdy finally gets frustrated and he runs up and he snatches a rifle out of a soldier's hands and says, "Put some lead down range, gun on it." And, you know, and he lets off. And remember, he was an extraordinary marksman. He could take an unzeroed M16 and did occasionally just and compete with anybody because he had spent time in the Army's Special Mission Unit. And so again, but I finally went up to him and I said, "Sergeant Major, please give the private his rifle back." But again, no, he was an extraordinary component in that mix that we had.
Right.
You had to have a lot of thought. You had to have a lot of, very detailed planning, all the rest of this stuff. It's not enough to have these big ideas. You got to actually operationalize them, resource them, efficiently implement them, and all the rest of that. You also have to have these other components. But that's, that team that was put together there was really, really quite unique and quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. One of the things we're talking about is leadership, and you talk about the op tempo and the training. I want to shift focus a little bit, sir, and talk about the trench range, right? So and I forget what range it was actually designated, but there was back in 91, I know that, and this was before actually I got to the battalion, but where there was that trench live fire accident where you ended up with the sucking chest wound. And then you were actually found later doing push-ups not long
Well, I was
after.
in a hospital, but
Right.
no, this is actually, it was actually a maneuver, although there were bunkers in it.
Right.
And we were one of the very few units that threw live grenades, holding them on yourself because they're very, very dangerous, obviously, even in training, and did more than just sort of throw them over a wall and get down, which was usually the annual, you get to throw one grenade a year. And they said, no, we're going to throw ours into bunkers. It's going to be part of the drill knockout bunker, which we incorporated among other drills in this one particular very aggressive live fire. And what we had done that morning, and by the way, it was a Saturday morning, so we're out there over the weekend, training hard. We'd gotten up quite early in the morning because it was a march and shoot kind of. So we walked 10 miles, road march 10 miles, and then went on the range, immediately went into the dry fire, then did a quick after action review, might have done it again, then did the live fire. And it was during that, one of the soldiers, Specialist Smith, who's very good soldier actually, and a particularly good runner. He knocked out the bunker with a grenade, went in, sprayed it, I think, and then came out. And as he came out, he tripped on the top step and his weapon discharged. We think what he did is, in those days, we didn't have yet the Rakkasan grip, which was to put your finger along the trigger housing, not in it. Because if it's in it and you tense up, which is what we think happened, because he got stunned briefly, he hit, probably tensed up on the way down, and a round went through my chest. Thankfully, it went through and kept on going. And we didn't have flak vests on, thankfully. We didn't have body armor in those days, and no flak vest, because it would have slowed it down enough. It just would have blown everything out of the back. But it was the new M16A2 with the M16A2 ammunition, which is much more stable and a longer range trajectory and so forth. But it was a sucking chest wound. And thankfully, our troopers knew the life-saving steps for dealing with a sucking chest wound. No kidding, actually took battery plastic out, put it over the exit wound, and got an IV going, and obviously and General Keane was standing next to me, actually. So once again, he loved that unit so much that instead of playing golf with a lot of the others on a Saturday morning, he was out there going through that live fire exercise with us. And so they got a medevac bird in, got me in. What they've got to do is just make sure you don't suffocate on your own fluids. And so they put a chest tube in you as quickly as they can get you to the emergency room, which is really painful because there's no anesthesia. They just cut an X in your side and say, this is really going to hurt, jam it in there and get suction on it. And it really did hurt. It's literally the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. But then put me back in the helicopter, flew me down to Vanderbilt Medical Center because they wanted to have them do it. And so then they cut you open and open it up and, staple up the wound. And they found an artery that had been nicked but not severed, or you would have bled out. We had 2 people killed that same year. One was in a trench fire, a live fire, another battalion commander, and another was a special forces, I think, sergeant first class. Again, in live fire exercises. This is how aggressive these were at Fort Campbell at that time. But then I got impatient. I needed to get back to the unit. I knew we were going to have this big exercise within less than 30 days. And so I said, okay, look, if I can do 50 push-ups, will that let me out of the hospital? So I got down and knocked those out. It's the only time I ever stopped at 50 push-ups, mind you. Anyway, and then they let me out and then got back to it. And so I was on that exercise. I could only carry a rucksack on the other side. The side where I've been cut was still pretty painful. But then came back, and we were talking about leading by example. You'll remember we started the Iron Rakkasan competition, and to ensure that the standards for that were always maintained, I was the grader. And so I would, we'd do during certain cycles, the support cycle, I would do that, 4 or 5 times a week and have these soldiers. And I had to compete every time. I mean, again, there was no spectators. If you wanted to come cheer your soldier on, you competed. Didn't matter that you may not, be in contention, because they had to have a certain level of already that they'd met. But that was a butt kicker. And again, to do it every single time. Remember, the standard for the run in that particular iteration of the Iron, because we had years later the Iron Eagle, which then I made it a 4-mile competition. But this is 2 miles in 11:54 on the track, and the track slows you down. So you have to move, you have to motor. And again, and that's after doing push-ups and sit-ups and before whatever else was in it. So you feel, and you've done max push-ups and sit-ups, because you got to up. It's not enough to just max the standard. You had to just qualify. You had to be able to do 82 push-ups, and we had clicker boards. Or my hand, 92 sit-ups, and they were fully vertical. Our dog gets into this too. Just thinking about it, she gets fired up. And then you had to do an 11:54 on the track, and then whatever other stuff, dips and pull-ups or what have you. But again, you gotta lead from the front, and again, you can't lead from the rear of the formation. And for those that thought that they could, perhaps they should go try that in another unit down the street.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could shift gears a little bit, one of the things, sir, that this show focuses heavily upon, of course, is veterans and issues that are challenging them, such as suicide and homelessness. What message or messages would you share to those currently navigating their way through their own challenges out there?
Well, first of all, I think that there are enormous opportunities for veterans. The fact is, now it's taken a while, but businesses now want all the veterans they can get. As you know, I'm a partner in one of the world's largest investment firms, KKR, and I chair our global institute. We do the geopolitical risk analysis and all the rest of that. We own about 110 companies around the world. We have minority interest in another 100 or so. And we have a program. So even in the business world, there are additional duties as you remember them. And one of my additional duties is to be the chairman of KKR's Vets at Work program. We believe, we'll verify this when we get the next update of our statistics, but we believe that we are now over 100,000 veterans and spouses, because we believe they also bring unique values, experiences, expertise, and so forth. But in the course of the last 8.5 years or so that I've been with the firm, businesses have very much come to recognize that veterans, they can't get enough veterans. They want veterans. Regardless of whether the veteran has expertise in that specific industry, sector, what have you, they still want them. And they will invest in them. They can educate, train, mentor, all the rest of that, guide them, and they'll end up, in most cases, being successful. So that's number one, that veterans should realize that. They should also understand that what they should seek is not just a job, but a career opportunity. There's a big difference. And the latter involves not just employment, but a commitment by the employer that they'll invest in these individuals. Again, they will provide the necessary training, education, mentoring, affinity groups, you name it, to help the veterans develop the technical expertise, knowledge, skills, and so forth necessary for success in that particular field, industry, sector. Beyond that, look, everybody goes through a tough time leaving uniform. I mean, there are three elements, I think, at least in my own experience, and most of those with whom I've discussed this issue, that you really miss, and you don't realize how much you miss until you've gone through it. But the first is a mission that's larger than self, and that was particularly profound during the war years. The second is the privilege of doing that with others who feel the same way. And even though we make light of it and make fun of it and all that, and chide each other, it's part of the, what goes on in the brotherhood of the close fight, which also, of course, now has females in it, and they've earned their way into that. But at the end of the day, we really do cherish those relationships that we had, however much fun and everything else that we've had and back and forth. And then the third is this sense of identity that comes from wearing the uniform, that particularly in the Army, because of all the stuff that we wear, when you're in your Class A uniform, if you will, as Sergeant Major Hill used to go through this, he said, we know who you are, that's the unit you're with, where you come from, the unit you were in combat with, how long you did it. So the 6-month combat hash marks. When I had my retirement photo taken, I wanted that right arm showing. I didn't do the usual headshot. I sat on a table with my right arm out here because I wanted, I was sort of quietly proud that these darn things went up almost around my elbow. And on a non-commissioned officer, you have the hash marks over there. And then you just look at all the skill badges and the service ribbons and campaign medals and all the rest of that. You can read a soldier's career in his or her uniform. That, there's nothing like that in the civilian world. I mean, at most you can wear maybe one of your medals in your lapel or something like that, which I do often. And maybe you can get a tie clasp, or you have something else that can show that, you're not just the other guy on the street. But this stuff you miss. And but it's especially the sense of community, I think. And again, especially the sense of community in a unit like 3rd of the 187, when we were privileged to serve in it. This just, this culture of toughness. And again, it's shared hardship, shared experiences, and ultimately in combat, it's shared risk as well, where you're literally, as you guys know, people don't fight for motherhood, apple pie, the American flag, democracy, and all the rest of that when it gets tough. Don't get me wrong, that these are all motivating elements, but what you're fighting for is to not let down your air assault buddy on your right and left, or your ranger buddy or your airborne buddy, whatever kind of unit you're in. And it's that kind of enormous commitment to each other, to not let that person down, to live up to the trust that others have in you. Again, that's pretty special. And again, veterans have to understand there are great opportunities perhaps out there, and there can be ones that, again, have a mission larger than self in a community and sort of an identity, but it's never quite as intense, if you will, as it is in the military, particularly again during the height of the war years that we experienced. Just have to understand that. And so, yeah, there's going to be moments that are moments, you're down because you're not in this anymore. It's different. You close the door for the last time, and, it's okay. You take the uniform off and hang it up, and that life is behind you, other than occasional sort of reunions and things like that. And you got to move on to what's next. And what is next can be extraordinary. There are great opportunities out there. And yes, there are all these, there are the physical wounds, there are the unseen wounds. And yes, individuals certainly will experience those, but you can never, ever succumb to the idea that life doesn't go on. Now, and should one ever start to contemplate that, you got to reach out to an old buddy. You got to find family members. You have to find others, or even professional help that can get you through that, because you'll get through that. Look, we've all had tough moments. I mean, everybody, life is not full of high five moments. Even the Iron Rakkasans came in second in the chili cook-off one time. I'm still burned about that. How could this happen? I've gone back and replayed this time and again. But, I can't believe that, the second of the 187 beat us out at the Hoptown Salute. But again, life goes on. So that's, I think, what veterans have to acknowledge.
Absolutely. Sir, you mentioned in a previous interview that America's new greatest generation is that of the 9/11 era. Would you elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. This really came from Tom Brokaw, who of course wrote the book, the great journalist and reporter, newscaster, and author who wrote the book, The Greatest Generation, about the World War II generation, what they did during the war and what they did when they came home. And he was with us when I was the commander of the Great 101st Airborne Division up in northern Iraq. And so we welcomed that. And, he came up, and I think we sent a helicopter to Baghdad to get him. He spent the whole day with our troops. It was hot as blazes, and he saw them conducting security operations. He saw them rebuilding infrastructure. I think he saw them battling the sulfur fire of all things. I mean, you couldn't make some of this stuff up. He saw them sitting down trying to reestablish local governance, rebuilding schools, and helping revive local economies. I think the wheat harvest was going on. I mean, everything. And he looked at all of this. And at the end of the day, I was there to see him off and probably give him a coin and something. And he grabbed me, and he's shouting in my ear because the turbines are whining and the Blackhawks. And he said, "General, I wrote that book, The Greatest Generation, about the World War II soldiers." And he said, they were the greatest generation of our country. But what I've seen today, this surely is America's new greatest generation. And look, that's where that came from. I embraced that idea then, and I've embraced it even more so over the subsequent years. Because again, remember, there was a period at which we were asking our young men and women in uniform, particularly in the Army, because the Army had the 12-month tours rather than the shorter tours of other services and some of the special ops, as much as they were rotating through. But again, 12 months, 15 months during the surge, the extension, and they'd go home and turn around and be back within 12 months. I mean, that's asking an extraordinary amount of our men and women in uniform and of their family members and their communities. And yet they re-enlisted at very high. In fact, I presided over what we believe is the largest re-enlistment ceremony in history. It was the 4th of July, 2008 in Baghdad. I was in the second year of commanding the surge, almost at the 18-month mark. 1,215 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, all with their right hand in the air reciting the oath after me. And I'm just, what is this all about? And once again, I came, what is motivating this? Again, because look, we had the highest or the lowest unemployment rate in America. We were on the eve of the Great Recession, but at least we didn't know it. I don't think our men and women in uniform knew it. What they knew was a very low unemployment rate back in the States. And here they are re-enlisting in a combat zone, knowing that they're going to go home and be asked to come back to a combat zone because we're going to shift focus over to Afghanistan as we did. And again, the only explanation for it in my mind as I was doing this ceremony was that, again, feel privileged to perform a mission larger than self, privileged to do it with others, and privileged to do it at a time where America's citizens, even if they disagree with the policies that we had, at least supported their men and women in uniform. And of course, this privilege of being in a community, having an identity that is defined by this uniform as well. So it's something that, again, is pretty special, and we've all experienced it and should treasure it. But there is a time when that phase of one's life, you close the door on that. You still are surrounded by, I could take you into the next room there and show you the Ranger Guide on and a whole bunch of other things. Each of them, remember we had those Dietz prints made for each regiment after the first year and so forth. They're all there. And you can cherish that time. You can think back to it. You can do what we're doing here, which is reminisce about it, and perhaps buff some of the tougher edges off the end of it in our memory, at least, and forget how miserable it can be to be cold, wet, and hungry at Fort Campbell in January. But at the end of the day, life goes on. And I think, again, veterans just have to understand that you can never contemplate the alternative. That's not something. And again, we've all been through tough times. We've all made mistakes. We've all had organizations we led make mistakes. That's life's, journey. We've all had missteps. And the question is, how do you go through that? And then how do you pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, acknowledge what happened, make amends if necessary, understand what you need to do to mitigate the risks of it happening again, and then put the rucksack on and start driving on.
Awesome. What's next for David Petraeus? What's next on the docket for you? You've served in numerous positions from ever since retiring from the military as director of the CIA. You've been in documentaries, lots of interviews. I mean, so many to your accreditation. What's next for you, sir?
Well, I actually really enjoy what it is I'm doing. I mentioned that I'm a partner in one of the world's biggest investment firms. It's grown dramatically during the 8.5 years I've been with it, really extraordinary. Grown over 5 times, I think, in our assets under management. It's been a privilege to be part of that. I find the work very intellectually stimulating. I find it is a mission larger than self, and we're taking people's pension funds and college endowments and all these others and investing them on their behalf and returning a good bit more than what they gave us to them. And obviously we're enjoying the fruits of that as well. I've been in academic endeavors about, 4 or 5 different appointments over the years. The current one is at Yale. We also have a fellowship there that bears my name for special operators. There's a host of nonprofits, veterans organizations I'm involved with, which are very rewarding. No One Left Behind right now to try to get our government to meet its moral obligation to those who shared risk and hardship with our soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan as battlefield interpreters, and who have largely been left behind so far. Think tanks, very active with them, because again, it's about intellectual stimulation, and yet still have time for a variety of different family activities. We have 3 grandkids now, which are great fun. Watch our kids as they go through life. Our son was a rifle platoon leader in the 173rd Airborne when I was the commander in Afghanistan, then went to the Rangers, did several more tours with Ranger Recon and their Special Troops Battalion, and then just finished a JD MBA at Harvard. And again, just watching them and applauding as they are going along life's journey. So, again, I've been just incredibly fortunate, and yet still have time for physical fitness. I wish I could take you downstairs and show you that we got a pretty darn good gym, and I'm pedaling 30 or more miles a day on a digital application called Zwift, which truth be known, we invested in at KKR quite substantially, but I was on it for 4 years before we even examined it. But so you have this great mix. There's a lot of travel, usually normally in pre-COVID times, 20 to 25 countries a year, several of them more than once, all the major cities in the US as part of these different activities. It couldn't be better, frankly. And, I've entertained the thought of some possibility of, certainly would never run for office, having tried to be non-political and just stayed at that ever since. It was when I was promoted to 2 stars, I decided I just ought to stop registering, voting, supporting anything, and I've continued that. And that stood me in good stead, I think. At least it gives you you can claim to be objective in a way that I think those who clearly have cast their lot with one or the other find that difficult to do. But again, I think it would have to be pretty extraordinary at this point in time. So I would never contemplate running for office. There's various ways, and certainly I do, if I'm asked by individuals of either party, I'll give them advice as well. And obviously I've tried to be forthright in offering thoughts and opinions on things like, should we stay in Afghanistan? Why did this happen? Have we met our moral obligation? What should we do elsewhere in the world? All these issues. And again, that's fascinating. And it's really, again, a privilege to be able to contribute at least to the debates, at least to the competition of ideas on such issues, and to still, frankly, have people ask you to do this kind of thing, frankly, as well, which is it's all good and it's all fun. And there's still time to walk that great dog that you heard giving emphasis to my discussion of the importance of physical fitness training.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sean, did you have any closing questions or anything that?
Oh man, there's so much there's so much I want to talk to you about, sir. I mean, there's just not enough time in this show to even. I just want to tell you just what a difference you made in my life personally. I came from a background, I was mentally and physically abused growing up. I faced a lot of hardships, and I joke, but it's partly true. I truly met my father figure when I joined the U.S. military. There's no doubt about that. That's where I found discipline. That's where I found, self-initiative. That's where I found, motivation. It's really where I found out what I was really capable of. And, I just want to thank you personally for believing in me as a PFC, giving me the opportunity to go to Ranger School, and proving that I was worthy to earn that tab. And I almost died doing it.
Well, you earned that. You earned that, though.
I did, but I really thank you for believing in me enough to send me. And Sergeant Major Purdy, as crazy as he was about it, when I got back, I had the utmost respect for that man for the rest of the time that he was there and beyond. And I just wanted to personally thank you for the difference that you made in my life by giving me that opportunity.
Well, no, look, it was the greatest of privileges. And, I thank you for what you contributed to that great organization, because it was a huge team effort. Everybody had to pretty much buy into it. Everybody had to, pull perform his share of the task and all the rest of that. So again, it was about all these, whatever it was, 600-700 great Iron Rakkasans, all of whom were willing to pick up the rucksack in tough conditions and just soldier on, no matter what it was. And I'll never forget leading the battalion over that big rock wall at the National Training Center in the middle of the night, because it's the only way we could figure out how to attack an enemy that was entrenched and had combat, a lot of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. We were just light infantry once we got off the helicopters. And just thinking through that night, God, I just hope nobody falls to his death here. And we made it, and got in behind them and just tore him up after having, been hammered out in the open by these. You just couldn't obviously stand up to the tanks in the the desert of the National Training Center. And finally, but it took that kind of physical and mental toughness and physical fitness. It's not enough just to be, again, to think you're ready to do this stuff. Your body has to enable you to do it as well. And we'd put, almost a year's work of effort into it by the time we actually had that particular experience. So, but no, look, I thank you, and I thank all the others who are part of that great organization and who, again, continued the culture. When Colonel Barbero took over, is still a lifelong friend of mine, was the chief of strategic operations during the surge many years later as a two-star. So, it was a very, very special experience. I think we all took a lot from it that guided us in future years. I think a lot of it was that, this is possible. You can actually create a high performance unit, as the term was back in that day, and you can sustain it. And again, all of this is, you just had to exercise a lot of initiative, and, occasionally someone would call up and say, I remember one of those was a brigade commander called up and said, "Hey, Dave, you don't have any troops outside the country, do you?" I said, "Oh, yes, sir. Yeah. Did I forget to tell you? We have this unit down in Panama with the Ranger Battalion. They needed an opposing force, and they were going to pay all the prize, and we get a lot of live fires out of it, and they would get to participate in the jungle training." And sorry for forgetting that, sir, but but you sort of they'd take you to the woodshed and then let you drive on, because again, it was good initiative. Yeah, and there were so many of those. There was another episode where we had this phenomenal special forces from 5th Group. Sergeant First Class was loaned to us before he went to officer candidate school. Really extraordinary guy, battlefield hero, and also had been #1 in his Ranger class. And we made him a platoon leader in battle company, of course. And he was there for several months. He took off his patch. He wore a Screaming Eagle patch. He took off his green beret and everything else. And it was the idea that when he got through OCS, he could then immediately go to the Ranger Regiment, because he would have already been a platoon leader in a conventional unit. Right. But I remember getting called by the brigade commander. He said, "Hey, Dave, do you have a green beret, non-commissioned officer serving as a platoon leader in the 3rd of the 187? "Oh, yes, sir. Darn it." He said, "Well, what kind of orders does he have?" Well, I said, "Sir, the 5th Group commander is across the backyard, and we shook hands on it." But again, because we had so much money in the bank in these other areas, it'd sort of say, okay, well, maybe we ought to follow up and get a piece of paper on this thing. So if something happens, because you do, there are official channels that they're there for a reason. Sure. We just didn't always get them right up front. But the results were so extraordinary. And as I said, that culture has been preserved. There's something that's special about that has been continued ever since, with different flavors, different approaches, different modifications. And so, we were really part of something special. We should treasure that. We should share that with others, as perhaps this will allow that to happen. But at the end of the day, then go on and not dwell in that, but look for opportunities in the future. So, when you ask what lies ahead, constantly looking for additional opportunities to, refresh intellectual capital, to find intellectual stimulation, to continue to contribute, to lead in certain activities, and all the rest of that, to be engaged in academia, because you're guiding future leaders in those endeavors, to help communities, veterans organizations, think tanks, and still, again, have time for family and your own personal physical fitness.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's hard. It's hard to be hard.
It's hard to be hard. Somebody's got to do it, right, sir?
Right.
I love it.
And I can still, if you ask me how many push-ups I can do to this day, my response will be, one more than you, big guy.
There you go. I love it. Well, General David Petraeus, retired, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you taking time out of your your busy schedule, and it's always great to reconnect, not only with Sean, but you as well, sir, and kind of, in a sense, relive some of the glory days, but
Yeah,
kind of get
And
your
they're more glorious with each passing year.
that's right. That's right.
and get your
Look,
feedback
I
and
thank
everything.
you guys.
And thank you so much for your service, sir. So
No, it was a privilege. It
absolutely.
was the greatest of privileges, really. And thanks to you, Dean, and Sean, for what you did back in the day and for what you continue to do to this day.
Well, thank you, sir. Rakkasan.
Air Assault, Rakkasan.